For 21 years, two teenagers were missing. Their families had searched. Police had followed leads. Rumors spread. People wondered whether Erin Foster and Jeremy Bechtel had run away, been taken, or met with something much worse. But the truth was far closer than anyone imagined. In November 2021, a man scanning the waters of a river in Tennessee spotted something on his sonar. It looked like a car. So, he went into the water. Upon reaching the vehicle, he discovered something that would finally answer a question that had haunted two families for more than 2 decades. Where were Erin and Jeremy? The answer had been right there, in the water, all along. It was April 3, 2000, in Sparta, Tennessee. Erin Foster was 18 years old. Jeremy Bechtel was 17. They were young, they knew each other well, and that evening seemed completely ordinary. But before the night was over, both of their lives would disappear from their families forever. Erin and Jeremy had been together that evening and were seen in Erin's black Pontiac Grand Am. At around 10 p.m., they were reportedly seen together in the vehicle near Sparta. At some point after that, everything went silent. Erin did not return home. Jeremy did not return home, and the car disappeared with them. The next morning, their families were facing something that is almost impossible for a parent or loved one to understand. There was no goodbye, no clear explanation, no confirmed destination, and no obvious crime scene. Just two teenagers who had seemingly vanished. At first, there were still possibilities. Maybe they had gone somewhere without telling anyone. Maybe they would come back. Maybe there was a simple explanation. But as the hours became days and the days became weeks, that hope became mixed with fear. Investigators began looking for answers, and soon, the case became much more complicated. There were rumors. There were possible sightings. There were theories about where Erin and Jeremy might have gone. Some leads even took investigators far away from Tennessee. But there was one thing missing from almost every theory: the car. Because if Erin and Jeremy had left Sparta voluntarily, where was the Pontiac? And if something had happened to them, why had nobody found it? That question would remain unanswered for more than 20 years. And what nobody knew yet was that the missing car was not thousands of miles away. It wasn't hidden in another state. It wasn't abandoned somewhere investigators had never searched. It was much closer, very close. In fact, people had been passing near it for years. For Erin's and Jeremy's families, the disappearance didn't simply become an old story. It became a question that never went away. What happened after they left that night? Where did the car go? And most importantly, were Erin and Jeremy still alive somewhere, or had something happened to them? Over the years, investigators followed numerous leads. There were reports and rumors that Erin might have been somewhere else. Some searches took investigators outside Tennessee. Other possibilities were investigated closer to home, but nothing produced a definitive answer. The case became what investigators often fear most: a mystery without a clear crime scene. There were no bodies, there was no vehicle, there was no confirmed location. And without those things, almost every theory remained possible. That uncertainty also created room for speculation. People wondered if the two teenagers had intentionally disappeared. Others believed they had been victims of a crime. Still others believed there had been an accident. But there was a major problem with the accident theory. If Erin and Jeremy had crashed somewhere, where was the wreck? For years, nobody could answer that. Then, decades later, something changed. A missing person report from the original investigation provided investigators with information about Erin's movements that helped narrow the search area. And one of the people who became interested in the case was a scuba diver and underwater searcher named Jeremy Sides. Sides had developed a particular way of looking for missing vehicles. Instead of searching only the land, he searched the places people often forget about: the water. He used sonar to examine riverbeds and look for shapes that could indicate submerged vehicles. And after becoming interested in Erin and Jeremy's disappearance, he traveled to Sparta. Authorities provided him with possible areas to search. One of those areas was the Calfkiller River. The river ran alongside Highway 84, and that detail would become incredibly important, because the answer to a 21-year mystery was about to appear on a sonar screen. November 30th, 2021. Jeremy Sides was searching the Calfkiller River. The water was not exactly the kind of place where you could simply look down and see everything beneath you. The river was murky. Visibility was limited. That is why sonar mattered. Instead of relying on his eyes, Sides could send sound into the water and examine the image created by the returning signal. And then, during the search, the sonar showed something, a shape on the river bottom, something that didn't belong there, a vehicle. At first, that didn't necessarily mean anything. Rivers contain all kinds of debris, old objects, metal, trees, and sometimes abandoned vehicles. But this particular discovery was different. The location mattered. The case mattered. And there was another question. Could this be Erin Foster's Pontiac? The vehicle was lying beneath the surface at a depth of roughly 13 feet. Sides needed to know what he had found, so the next day, he went into the water. He descended toward the vehicle. As he approached, the shape on the sonar became something much more recognizable. It was a Pontiac Grand Am, the same general type of car Erin had been driving when she disappeared. But there was still one final piece of confirmation: the license plate. Sides located the plate and brought it to the surface, and the numbers matched the vehicle connected to Erin Foster. At that moment, this was no longer simply a possible lead. It was Erin's missing car. After more than 2 decades, the vehicle had finally been found. But there was something much more disturbing waiting inside. And Sides knew immediately that this discovery was bigger than a missing car case. He contacted authorities. The sheriff's office began processing the vehicle. And soon, investigators would have to confront the possibility that 2 teenagers who had vanished in 2000 had been underwater the entire time. This is the moment that changed everything. For more than 21 years, Erin Foster and Jeremy Bechtel had been missing. Now their vehicle had been located beneath the Calfkiller River. And inside the vehicle, investigators found human remains. The discovery was devastating. But there was still a question that had to be answered scientifically. Whose remains were they? Finding a car was one thing. Finding remains was another. Authorities needed to establish their identities. The vehicle was removed from the river, and investigators began processing the evidence. For the families, this was an emotional turning point. For more than 2 decades, they had lived with uncertainty. Now they had something they had been searching for all those years: an actual location, a vehicle, evidence, and eventually, confirmation. The remains were identified as Erin Foster and Jeremy Bechtel. The mystery of where they had gone was finally over. But that did not mean every question had been answered. In fact, one of the biggest questions was still waiting. How did the car get into the river? That question matters because finding the victims is not the same thing as knowing exactly how they died. Investigators did not announce evidence establishing foul play. Instead, authorities considered the possibility that Erin was driving along Highway 84 when the car left the roadway and entered the river. There was an important detail about that stretch of road. At the time of their disappearance in 2000, there was no guardrail along that section, so the accident theory was possible. But there was no perfect reconstruction showing every second of what happened, and that leaves us with something unusual. The location mystery was solved, the identities were solved, but the exact sequence of events remains less certain. And that distinction is important, because this isn't a story about a YouTuber proving a murder. It's a story about a missing person mystery finally revealing its location. Think about the geography for a moment. Erin and Jeremy disappeared in Sparta, Tennessee. Their car was eventually found in the Calfkiller River near Highway 84. That means the answer wasn't hidden on the other side of the country. It wasn't buried in some remote location. It was underwater. And for years, people had been living their lives around that area without knowing what was beneath the surface. Erin's father, Cecil Foster, later described how he and his son had fished in that area over the years. They had been near the river. People had driven along the road. Investigators had searched for answers, and yet the vehicle remained hidden below the water. That is one of the most haunting aspects of this case. For 21 years, the families were searching for a place. They didn't know exactly what place they were looking for, and without the right information, the search area was enormous. But once the vehicle was located, the story suddenly made sense in a way it never had before. The missing car explained why there had been no obvious trace of Erin and Jeremy. The river had hidden the evidence, the water had concealed the vehicle, and the passage of time had made the discovery even harder. That is where technology played an important role. Side-scan sonar doesn't magically solve a case. It doesn't identify people. It doesn't tell investigators what happened. What it can do is reveal objects that human eyes cannot see beneath the surface. In this case, that was enough to change the direction of a 21-year mystery. A sonar image led to a vehicle. The vehicle led to a license plate. The license plate led to Erin's missing car. And the car finally led investigators to Erin and Jeremy. That's the chain, not a miracle. Not a supernatural discovery. Just information, technology, persistence, and one object sitting in a place no one had successfully found for more than 2 decades. But there is still one final question. If the car was there the whole time, why did nobody find it sooner? After 21 years, Erin Foster and Jeremy Bechtel were finally found. Their families finally knew where they were. But knowing where they were is not the same as knowing exactly what happened that night. And that is where this case should end, not with a sensational claim, but with the facts. Investigators found no evidence that established foul play at the scene. The leading explanation was that Erin was driving the Pontiac Grand Am along Highway 84 when the vehicle left the road and entered the Calfkiller River. The lack of a guardrail at that location in 2000 made that possibility plausible, but we should be careful with the word certain. There is a difference between what investigators believe happened and what can be proven about every moment of that night. We don't have a complete recording of the drive. We don't have a witness who watched the vehicle enter the river. And we don't have a definitive reconstruction of exactly why the car left the roadway. What we do know is much more concrete. Erin Foster was 18. Jeremy Bechtel was 17. They disappeared on April 3, 2000. For more than 2 decades, their families lived without knowing where they were. Then, in November 2021, a sonar search located a submerged vehicle in the Calfkiller River. The vehicle was identified as Erin's Pontiac. Human remains were recovered, and those remains were later identified as Erin Foster and Jeremy Bechtel. A mystery that had lasted 21 years finally had an answer to its most painful question. Where were they? They had never been far away. They had been beneath the water. And perhaps the most haunting part of the story is that the river had been there the entire time, silently holding the answer while the people who loved them continued searching. For the families, the discovery could never undo what happened. But it ended something else, the uncertainty. After 21 years of wondering, Erin and Jeremy could finally be brought home. And that is why this case is remembered not simply as a mystery that was solved, but as a reminder that sometimes the answer isn't necessarily somewhere far away. Sometimes it's right in front of us. If you want to follow more cases where years of unanswered questions lead to unexpected discoveries, subscribe to Unsolved Mystery Files. Because some mysteries don't go away, they wait until someone finally looks in the right place.